Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Episode 52, Twists and Turns. In today's episode, we're going to explore the Third Syrian War in a bit more detail before turning to other matters. We've seen Antioch fall away and the fleet experience a disaster, with a lot of people dying, so now let's see if fortune is about to favour Seleucus II. Our new king had a lot of legwork to do if he wanted to move against Ptolemy III. Goal number one was stabilising Anatolia, which would have been disrupted by Ptolemy's presence and the navy sinking. Now, by this time, Seleucus' sister Laodike was the wife of Mithridates II of Pontus. Another sister called Stratonike, her name no doubt a throwback to the Stratonike we discussed back in episode 21, was the wife of Ariarathes of Cappadocia. So as you can see, we've got relatives married into the Anatolian royal families. Added to this, Seleucus' wife was, as we've discussed previously, Laodike II. There's a bit of a dispute as to her parentage, which we'll get into in future episodes, but she was related to Andromachus and was part of the Achaeus branch of the royal family. We'll get into the exact nature of the Anatolian connections another time, but the Achaeus branch of the family, prominent in Anatolia, was now brought into the tribe of the royal family. This basically meant that the Seleukids were now one of the royal houses in the peninsula. To top all of this off, Seleucus put Antiochus Hyrax, his younger full brother, in charge of Anatolia. This indicates Seleucus was aware that he would not be able to talk to his western domain once he crossed over to face Ptolemy III. Hyrax was quite a bit younger than Seleucus, so Laodike I was influential. Point is, Seleucus used the weddings and Hyrax to nail down Anatolia. Grainger says this was a bit like his grandfather Antiochus I, who had dispatched someone called Patroclus to secure the region in 281 to 280 BCE. We also see some politicking happening in Anatolia during the course of the Third Syrian War. Bevan recounts this happens before the fleet sinks, but he also said that Seleucus crosses over into Anatolia, so I'm a little unclear on the timeline. Either way, we see Smyrna being vulnerable to Egyptian assaults and to attacks from its neighbouring city, Magnesia on Sipylus. Magnesia had a large army base and came out in opposition to Seleucus II and his mother. The city now attacked the farms of Smyrna, but Smyrna held out and eventually managed to swallow up its neighbour. Seleucus II is known to have dished out rewards to the city of Smyrna. They were given the standard right of autonomy and not having to be tributary to him. However, he also allowed them all their territory and promised anything they once had would be given back. Bevan's text is a little unclear here to my mind, but I think this refers to Smyrna swallowing up Magnesia being sanctioned. Seleucus was also very interested in the temple of Aphrodite Stratonikis. To my mind, this once again refers back to Stratonike, the wife of Antiochus I and therefore the grandmother of our new king. However, I'm not positive about the connection with this epithet. Smyrna wanted their temple to be seen as sacrosanct and to bolster the city's own reputation. They asked for the oracle at Delphi to confirm this, and Seleucus II threw himself behind their cause, pestering various peoples to recognise the sanctity of the temple. With that said, that's Anatolia dealt with, so let's now move over into the east. In 245 BCE, Seleucus II moved to make Babylon stable. He moved into Seleucus and went for Ptolemy's metaphorical throat. This move would isolate Xanthippos, the Spartan we introduced last episode, over in the Mesopotamian region of the Seleukid Empire. It would also act to solidify Seleucus as king in the area. By the middle of 245 BCE, around the time that Ptolemy III was going back home, it is thought that Seleucus had consolidated Babylon and Mesopotamia. The situation was now that Seleucus controlled the middle, Antiochus Hyrax held the west, and the east was mostly on the side of Seleucus II. That said, Diodotus I had governed Bactria for about 10 years, and the Seleukids didn't really have a lot of power there anymore. Still, I suppose it's the fact that Diodotus isn't actively rebelling that's important right now. Seleucus II has enough on his plate as it is. As a reminder, Ptolemy III had retreated back to Egypt. However, the war didn't finish. Some say that Ptolemy was clever in drawing back. and his family has usually been on the more cautious and pragmatic side according to Bevan. However, he says Ptolemy III really seems to have been thinking about crowning himself Asian king. Bevan is of the opinion that he wanted to rule Iran from his Egyptian capital, and that it was just events around him which brought him back west. Regardless, Ptolemy travelling away meant that the pressure had eased off a bit for the Seleucids as Seleucus travelled east. We see several cities come back to Seleucus II. Bevan writes that, likely as not, the settlements of North Syria were loyal to the Seleucids, and weren't rebelling against them so much as aggrieved for the deaths of Berenike and Antiochus the Unfortunate. When it came out that the Seleucids were going to fall if Ptolemy had his way, there was a rush back to the other side. Syria was now made the next target of the war. By 244 BCE, Seleucus had taken control of Antioch once again. In fact, by the time a peace deal came in 241, the majority of the cities captured by Egypt were back in his hands. Abydos, the mint city we spoke about before, had talked its way back over to the Seleukid side by 242. However, Ptolemy appears to have held sway over the coast for a number of years. The fact that Abydos had come back into the fold allowed Seleucus to attack Phoenicia. Orthosia, to the south of the Eleutheros River, which we spoke about ages back as the border between Seleucus I and Ptolemy I, was taken. Seleucus travelled down to Damascus from there. These gains may not have been long-term additions to the Seleukid Empire, but it still sent a message that Seleucus could hurt Ptolemy even with a crippled empire. Ptolemy III retreated gradually, fighting all the way, which continued until a deal was brokered. By contrast, the Egyptian fleet was far more effective in the late 240s BCE. For example, they took Ephesus after another power change, although Miletus stayed on the Seleukid side. Settlements straddling the Hellespont and those near Lysimachia were Egyptian by 240 BCE. Seleucus went on the offensive, and there was a battle located in Palestine. In this engagement, Seleucus II was routed and drew back towards Antioch with his crippled forces. He was now in a precarious position once again, as he had no army anymore. This particular fight drew the king's focus south, making Antioch his focal point rather than Ephesus or Sardis. By 241, the conflict had reached deadlock. Seleucus had taken back a lot of territory, but he hadn't gotten Seleucia in Pieria back. Back in the day, Seleucus I seems to have wanted this city to be the epicenter of the Seleukid realm. It was well protected, housed the necropolis of the early imperial family, and was on the road to the heartlands. Seleucus II must have been desperate to get it back, but he couldn't do so. When peace came, it was still in the possession of Ptolemy III. Near the end of the war, Seleucus sent a missive to Anatolia. After Ptolemy defeated him in Palestine, he sent Hyrax a message asking for help. This shows Antiochus must have had autonomy in Anatolia according to Bevan, or at least that there were those working on his behalf who did. As we said, Antiochus was a king, and we see a temple at Branchidae with an inscription talking about kings plural, although Hyrax is the junior partner. Seleucus really needed his brother to work with him at this point, and he offered to split the empire at the Taurus Mountains, giving his brother everything that lay to the west. This would basically have made the existing situation a political reality. The Anatolian court at Sardis sent soldiers east to join Seleucus. Somehow Ptolemy hadn't banked on this, and Bevan seems confused by the idea that he thought the brothers wouldn't have helped each other. Then again, with Seleucus the young king rebelling against his father and being killed back in episode 30, maybe we've got proof family ties don't necessarily mean as much in the Hellenistic world. Rather than exploiting his smashing success in Palestine, Ptolemy signed a deal with Seleucus. So let's move on to discuss this piece of 241 BCE. It made the Eleutheros River the border, with Abydos being Seleukid. Everything, except Seleucia in Pieria, was restored to Seleucus. Cilicia was restored, but Ptolemy held on to some port areas. Add to this, the Seleucids had been evicted from Thrace, and Ptolemy had gained power in the Aegean. The Seleukid position was less prestigious thanks to lands being lost, and, in his quest to get Syria back, Seleucus might have been forced to make Hyrax and Diodotus more or less independent. Not exactly the glorious victory Seleucus II might have been hoping for. We see in Bevan's writing that the peace lasted for a decade, but Grainger is dismissive of the idea, with neither side paying any heed to an end date of 231. Justinus is supposedly incorrect with this detail, and it seemed that the treaty would hold until the first monarch died. So, we've seen the end of the Third Syrian War. However, all of this seems too optimistic of a story to be true for our poor beleaguered Seleucus II. After the conflict, Seleucus wanted to get his authority back, but this was difficult. One man refusing to bow down to the king was his own brother Antiochus Hyrax. He had been given, or had given himself, the title of king. This had likely as not been imperative in the quest to actually have control in Anatolia. Antiochus was also presumably the heir to the throne until the sons and daughters of Seleucus II had lived through their earliest years. When the war ended, Hyrax's position was in danger. Next time, we'll focus in on Hyrax and the descendants of Achaeus the Elder. We'll also see if Antiochus really is as cooperative as his brother might have been hoping. Until then, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions or comments. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.